Welcome to Disarming Leviathan, a podcast designed to equip you to missionally engage American Christian nationalists. For more info on today's guest and our suite of resources, visit disarmingleviathan.com.
Rachel, as we speak, we're in our news cycle. There is a large conversation going on right now about like the leader of the Department of Defense and the pastor that oversees his movement, the movement of churches that he's a part of, the denomination, specifically around stuff like women voting and women's rights, and also in like all these podcasts and YouTube stuff. There's dudes with beards usually who are saying it's like, women's jobs are to make babies. It seems like the volume's being turned up on this stuff. What's your read on what's going on right now?
Yeah. Well, women are the people that people come out of. So that happened this week on CNN. Yeah, the volume is definitely being turned up. I have been around this stuff for my entire life because I was born into the Quiverful movement. My parents were involved in Bill Gothard's ministry. So I grew up kind of in IBLP, which is Bill Gothard's ministry. Not geographically, but we were enrolled in their homeschool program. Two of my oldest siblings went to work at his headquarters. So I have been close to this my entire life. And most of my life, I've considered it fringe. I always knew that we were kind of on the outside and we were going to a pretty mainstream church, and always felt like, oh, we're so weird here. Like nobody else is like us. And now I'm looking around, and all that stuff that was fringe when I was growing up and I felt like a freak because we lived this way is now, on national news. And there are very powerful influencers who are out there spreading this message, and people are not rejecting it out of hand anymore, which is terrifying to see. And I think a lot of the reason people are not rejecting it out of hand is because they're not prepared for it. They're not educated on it. They're not inoculated against it in the way that I am, having heard these arguments and lived them out to a certain extent and realizing, this does not end well, actually. So as far as the women voting thing, I think what makes it difficult is that they're not going to come up to you and say, we want to take the vote away from women. That's not how they approach it. That is their end goal, but they're going to use this language of, well, we just want to return to the household vote. And the household vote is just a different way of saying that only men will vote, because the idea is it's going to be one vote per household. And the man and the woman are theoretically going to discuss this, although there would be no law saying thou shalt discuss your vote with your wife. But in the end of the day, it's the man who's going to pull the lever on the voting machine and decide who they as a family are voting for. And they'll tell you, there's actually historical precedent for this. There used to be household voting, and things were better back then because men had a sense of responsibility for their families. And now we're just very atomized and individualized. There's some really big problems with that historical analysis. One of which is that, yes, there was, it was one vote per household, but household did not mean a mom and a dad and a kid and kids. It meant a landowner, and not everybody owned land. And some of the people who did not own land were people who were enslaved. So a big reason why we went from household voting to universal male suffrage, because this is before the 19th Amendment, was so that newly freed slaves would be able to vote. So when they say we need to go back to the way things were, we have to remember that doesn't just include women not voting anymore. It's also men without property, and in particular, Black men would have been just totally disenfranchised under that system.
So there are all these talk tracks that could sound biblical. The family is important to God, or family values, or, my love for the family. And some of the criticisms of modern culture can sound sometimes right on. Rampant individualism is unhealthy for us. Consumeristic capitalism can hurt us. We need to think about, caring for the land, and, technology can be dangerous. And so we need to, but it sounds like what you're saying is underneath it, the rhetoric could be some really gnarly, even sometimes downright manipulative, sometimes evil power plays that are going to put more power into the hands of a few at the expense of a lot of other people, oftentimes the disenfranchised, the vulnerable. And so just being attuned to what's going on in actual life when this happens. So you're on the inside of this movement that talked about care for the family and, men taking responsibility. I think being responsible is a really good thing. How it played out was kind of a domination vibe, or in practice, actual domination over one's, family. What is the effect of this posture in the real world? So not the YouTube videos and not the books, but like in the actual world that you have grown up in, what was the effect of that posture?
So it does not work as advertised in the real world. Like you said, on their YouTube channels and, the TikTok reels, they can make it sound really nice. And when you point a camera at somebody for 10 seconds and everything is controlled and engineered, you can make this lifestyle look really good. And they're always going to say things like, oh, this is about responsibility, male responsibility, and you want men to step up, right? That's what you want. This is what women actually want. But how it plays out in real life 100% of the time is that women get blamed for everything. So they say it's about men taking responsibility, but that is not what actually happens. And the reason why that doesn't happen is because when you're all about protecting male power, you're all about protecting male power. And that's your priority. That's your baby that you are protecting. So all of that energy that they say is going to go towards protecting their wives and protecting their children and protecting the vulnerable does not actually go there. It goes towards protecting the precious baby of patriarchal power. So that's what their decisions are going to be motivated by. And I've seen it over and over again. And anybody who's been close to Christian patriarchy and, looked at it with anything of a critical eye will tell you the same, that they will protect patriarchal power at the expense of women and children every day of the week.
Mm-hmm. So you've been working on a resource for those of us trying to figure this out. Tell us about that work.
Yeah. So I have been working for the last year on a video course called It's a Man's World, the Genesis 3:16 Effect. And I'm doing that for a ministry that I work for called the Gnostics Center for Christian Ministry and Education. And what we wanted to do is create a resource that would just help people understand the world that we're in today in 2025, but also just the world that we're in because of the fall, and looking at that more broadly, looking at women's history through a lens of the Bible and understanding this is why things are the way that they are. And in particular, this is why women accept the things, the way that things are, and actually will often act to protect the systems that they are being oppressed by. And there's an explanation for that in the Bible in Genesis 3:16, which is why we have made that our subtitle. So Genesis 3:16 is kind of our jumping off point, and that's the lens that we point at various aspects of women's lives, including moral responsibility, like we just talked about, how women tend to get blamed in patriarchal systems, labor, reproduction, civil rights. So all these things that we've been talking about will be covered in that course.
Cool. And the course is helping us have a broader understanding of what's going on, but also how the scriptures can shape our understanding in a healthy way. Because oftentimes these movements are using a lot of Bible talk. One of the Bible words or phrases is quiverful.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
So quiverful is a movement that started, I want to say, like in the 1970s. And then the idea of it is taken from Psalm 127, I think I'm getting that right, that talks about blessed is the man whose quiver is full of children. And it compares children to arrows in a man's quiver. So I won't do like an analysis of Psalm 127 right now for your podcast, but basically they zero in on that phrase and on that one verse, and they're like, well, what this means is if 5 arrows is good, 10 arrows is better. Okay. And so it just becomes this logic of if the right people have more kids, they're going to put the world right. And they're going to do that by engaging in a culture war against the wrong kind of people. So at first it sounds very pro-life. It sounds like, well, this is great. Like we love babies, we love life, we love people. And that's all true and good. But the problem is that if you are having children in order for those children to engage in a culture war with other people's children, that's not pro-life, because wars involve casualties. And, wars are two groups of people coming together to kill each other. And that may not be literally true in the culture wars yet. It doesn't necessarily mean it never will be. But that's the logic. It's a logic of destroying other people so that you can have dominance. And it has a way of replacing the Christian call to missions and to go out to the lost. Because the thinking is, well, that's not a very sure bet. Like, we might go out and try to evangelize people and it doesn't change their minds. But if we have, 10, 12, 19 kids, like the Duggars, we have what they feel like is a sure bet. Like, we can control what these children think and what kind of values they're going to carry forward to the next generation.
Rachel, just as you're mentioning the Duggars and some others, it does strike me, sometimes children don't believe the same way their parents do.
Shocking, I know.
I don't know if rebellion is the right word, but, like that teenage rebellion thing. There's also children who grow up in toxic systems and abusive families that respond with pursuing a different life path, often towards health. So it seems to me, it's not just making sure you have a lot of arrows. You've also got to make sure that they shoot the way you want them to.
Yes.
You've got to train up your children like some kind of culture war military. So how do they do that? What's the energy being put behind making sure these kids do what I say so we can fight the culture war?
Yeah. This is why quiverful and homeschooling always, always, always go together. Now, you can be a homeschooling family without being quiverful, but I have never seen a quiverful family that was not either homeschooling or in a private Christian school. Often the classical private Christian schools like what Doug Wilson is running, is where these quiverful families will send their children so that they know, okay, they're going to be educated and molded into the purpose that we had them for. So it's very much a controlling environment because it has to be. If you are having children and your motivation is for them to go into the next generation and carry forward certain values and fight certain battles, you have to have a very controlling parenting environment.
So there's this idea that we're going to change culture. We're going to make culture more godly, whatever culture is, by the way. We're going to make our community, the world, more godly by procreating and generating enough people through the household, which, by the way, only gets one vote, to kind of, I guess, outnumber people who aren't like us, so that by sheer force of the majority, we can make a godly community. And so let's have a lot of kids. Let's make sure that they're getting trained a certain way towards the end of some form of cultural persuasion or dominance. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not all of them will put it that bluntly, but there are certainly the leaders of this movement do. And I have, in my research, I've gone back and read a lot of the quiverful classics, as it were. Nancy Campbell's Be Fruitful and Multiply, Rick and Jan Hess's A Full Quiver, these kinds of books that in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s were setting out, like they're quiverful manifestos. And they are not subtle about what they're trying to do. They are very willing to tie it to politics and say, imagine what we could do with a voting block like this, where we could just decide for everybody else how things are going to be because there's more of us than of you. There's one book, I think this is in the Hess's book, where they actually frame the fact that people are dying of AIDS as being a positive thing, because you don't just want your numbers to go up, you want the enemy's numbers to go down.
Oh my gosh.
So they're happy that feminists are not getting married and having children. They're happy that people who are homosexuals or any other kind of like non heterosexual lifestyle are contracting sexually transmitted diseases and dying. It gets really, really dark, but that's kind of the math of it. Is if this is why you're having all these kids, it's just as much to your advantage for other people to not have children or just die.
Yeah. Gosh. So you grew up in this environment. What have you noticed in your peers who also grew up in this environment?
I honestly did not grow up around very many people who grew up in this environment. My family was just geographically located away from the hubs of quiverful churches. Like, my parents would have liked to have gone to a quiverful church, but there just weren't any close enough by. So that was quite isolating. I'm grateful for it now, because it would have been worse if we had been in a church that was, everyone around us reinforcing that. But as far as my generation, I notice a pattern where for a while, the kids will affirm what their parents taught. I mean, you see it in Josh Harris, whose father, a lot of people don't realize this, his father was actually like kind of big stuff in the homeschooling world. He wrote books on homeschooling. He was quite active. So he's the one who, Josh Harris is the one who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. But as we all know, he majorly walked that back and pulled it from print. And now he is, totally deconstructed Christianity entirely. And there's others who, if they haven't deconstructed Christianity entirely, they have definitely reevaluated the beliefs that they held when they were young. So it only works for so long when you indoctrinate people as children. Like, eventually they're going to grow up and they're going to realize there's a whole world out there and there are different ways of living. A few people have been successful at retaining the next generation. Doug Wilson is one of them. He has built this entire media empire and academic empire that his kids are all involved with. So it's not that it never works. It's just that it doesn't work reliably enough to do what they hope it's going to do.
Yeah. So you mentioned Doug Wilson. He is in Moscow, Idaho. And you're also in Idaho, although I think is it Boise?
Yes. Yeah, we're in Boise.
So what's your take on Moscow? Like, is it, some of the things that I've heard is, that movement is trying to take the city or town. I don't know how big it is, or influence it. And some of the stuff that I've read of Wilson's and others is like, yes, we are trying to do that. Taking what's your read on what's going on in Moscow?
Yeah, I was actually just there last weekend. I was there for the Sons of Patriarchy live recording. So that was the first time I'd actually been on the ground at Moscow. And gosh, what do I say? The rumors are all true. They are definitely trying to take over Moscow, and you can feel it. Like, even when you walk through downtown, there's this tension. And you go from one business to another, and you can tell, like, okay, that's Christchurch people. And then you go to the next one, and there's pride flags, and everyone is welcome signs and stuff like that. So it's it really does feel like kind of a battlefield, and it's operating the way that battles do, that you're trying to gain ground. So I feel like what Christchurch is trying to do is just buy up businesses, buy up land until they are an economic force that people can't ignore anymore. Which, by the way, is a really great way of retaining your people, because if you build this economic ecosystem, and as soon as people move to Moscow, they're like, hey, I can get a job. I've got my life pretty much laid out for me. That's really easy to come into. It's a lot easier it's a lot harder to get out of when everything is coming from the hand of Christchurch. Like, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds.
Yeah. Yeah. All the incentives to stay become, for lack of a better term, reasons why people stay.
Yes.
Or to put it another way, even if they want to leave, you're looking at, well, where am I going to work? How am I going to feed the kids? All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And those things, it's not always a matter of people consciously thinking, this is bad, I wish I could leave, but I can't because of these practical things. Like, those practical things impact how you process information and how you decide what you think is right or wrong. Because even though, we would like, especially the Moscow crowd would like to think that they make objective, totally non-emotional decisions just based on fact and logic. That's just not how people's brains work. Yeah. And when you know that coming to conclusion A would mean having to change a lot of things about your life and make your life just a lot more difficult and chaotic than it is, you're going to be a lot more inclined to come to conclusion B, because you don't want to face the consequences of coming to that other conclusion.
Yeah. there's an old line, and it's something like convincing someone of a truth that is not in their financial best interest.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely difficult.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man. So Rachel, many of us, as we're listening to this, we're thinking, oh, I think I've got friends and family who are drawn to this kind of stuff. Some of us grew up in it. Some of us know about it firsthand. Others of us are experiencing this through like the trad wife movement on social, or the Theo bros, who are doing podcasts about this stuff, talking about quiverful and votes and all this kind of stuff. What coaching would you give to us as we're thinking about, how do I talk to my family and friends who are drawn into this stuff? And oftentimes, using values language, Bible language, faithfulness language. How would you give us some coaching on how to approach people in our lives who are drawn into this?
Sure. I think a helpful thing is to point them to people like myself, but there are also many, many others who have grown up in these movements not as decision makers, as people whose lives were under these kinds of decisions and how they play out for people that didn't pick this lifestyle. Because my parents, it's not like they carried forward their parents' values. My grandparents thought all the Gothard stuff was kind of weird and wacky, and they didn't actually approve of it. So my parents got to be agents in that process and decide this is what we think should happen. And it's a lot different being in that world when you have agency and when you've picked it versus when you're born into it and this is just something that's happening to you. So I would direct people who are considering this lifestyle and considering the promises that they offer you, like, well, talk to somebody who knows, like talk to somebody who's experienced it and ask them, hey, what was your experience like growing up in a family of 10 children or 12 children that was highly invested in the culture wars? Did you love it? Do you still hold those values? Just think ahead a little bit, because it's really easy for them to say, this is what things are going to be like. Your grandchildren and your great grandchildren or your great great grandchildren will look back at you and say, that was when it all started. Like, probably not.
Yeah, right.
That's probably not going to happen. And my parents did not have a generation like me to tell them, this is not how things are going to work out. I know you think they are, but these promises, he can't keep them.
Yeah.
So we have an advantage over the generation in the 70s and 80s who got into this stuff, because now we have the generation that grew up in it to say, hey, I want to let you know things won't go the way that you think they will.
Yeah.
So with that information, like, we have a lot of responsibility to examine that evidence and data and make a better decision.
Yeah, that's good. That's so good. Yeah, looking at the fruit of a movement to discern if it's wise and loving to be a part of it, I think is so key.
Yeah. And we're told to do that in the Bible. I think a lot of times people will kind of discount that and say, well, that's just, it's just a few bad apples. And you can't make a decision based on, something that's kind of subjective like that. I'm like, well, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says, how you can tell what's false teaching and what's good teaching. Look at the fruit that comes out of it. So in my experience, that's worked out pretty well.
Yep. Yeah. Cutting through the rhetoric and the marketing and looking at what's actually going on. That's really good. Rachel, thank you so much for investing this time with us. Where can people find you and your work?
Yeah. So you can look up the It's a Man's World series at agnosticuscenter.org/Man's World. And that's going to have all of the information about where the episodes will drop. There's already a preview episode that you can watch now, and that's going to be on that webpage. So, yeah, please check it out, and we would love to see you in the YouTube comments, or there's also a conference coming up in October, and you can read more about that at the Analysis Center website as well.
Oh, that's great. Cool. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Caleb.